Our group will compare how the United States and China responded to the economic shock of COVID-19 using both empirical data and short-run macroeconomic theory. We analyzed three key areas, which are labor markets, inflation trends, and the ISMP Phillips curve, which together explain how fiscal and monetary policy affected output and prices. COVID causes one of the largest demand shocks in modern history. These models help explain why the US and China had different unemployment patterns, inflation outcomes, and recovery paths.
Now let us move to the unemployment. In 2020, the US saw unemployment rise sharply to nearly 8%, reflecting large-scale job destruction in hospitality, tourism, retail, and entertainment. Lockdown triggered millions of layoffs within weeks. China, however, recorded only a modest increase from about 4.5% to slightly above 5%, indicating far smaller job losses due to early outbreak control and continued industry activity. By 2021, the US experienced strong job creation. Business reopened, stimulus measures boosted demand, and firms rehired rapidly. As a result, unemployment fell from 8% to 5% within a year and nearly returned to pre-pandemic level by 2022. Next, I will explain this labor outcome using the LSLD framework. The US COVID caused a sharp leftward shift in labor demand as businesses closed and hiring froze, leading to major job destruction in 2020. In 2021, reopening and fiscal stimulus shifted LD rightward, driving rapid rehiring. In China, the LD shift was far smaller. Targeted lockdowns and continued industrial activity limited the fall in labor demand, so job losses were modest. In 2021, LD shifted slightly right as the economy reopened.
Inflation outcomes were almost the opposite of unemployment. China's inflation fell to around 1% in 2021, largely because of weak demand, slow reopening, and limited mobility. The US, however, saw inflation rise sharply to around 8% in 2022. This was driven by strong fiscal and monetary stimulus, rapid demand recovery, and supply chain disruptions. Because the US economy recovered faster, demand has exceeded supply. According to the Phillips curve, a positive output gap leads to a higher inflation. That's exactly what we have seen in the US from 2021 onwards. China's output gap remained negative for longer, keeping inflation low. This slide now shows how the short-run model works. When the central bank raises the policy rate, which is the nominal interest rate, the real interest rate increases, reducing spending. Higher real interest rates then reduces consumption and investment, which lowers the output gap. When the output is below potential, the change in inflation decreases, reducing price pressure. In short, increasing interest rates lowers output then lowers inflation, while lowering interest rates increases output and then produces higher inflation. This framework explains the different policy outcomes in the US and China.
United States, the country's IS curve is on the left in the year 2020. The country experienced a very sharp collapse in aggregate demand where consumption fell, investment declined, and businesses sold. And this has caused a large shift in the IS curve from potential output and gave a significant negative output gap. The job destruction mentioned earlier reflects this fall in demand too. And to counter this, the Federal Reserve has cut interest rates to near zero, shifting the MP curve downwards. In 2021, the IS curve shifts right. Massive fiscal stimulus and the reopening of the economy shifted the IS curve strongly to the right. The output gap swung from negative 4.9% to 3.28%, showing a rapid demand recovery. Meanwhile, in China, the IS curve shifted left slightly due to a small fall in consumption and investment. The industrial production stayed open, hence reducing the size of the demand shock. In 2021, China's IS curve shifted moderately right as the economy reopened. Output moved from negative 4.07% to 2.16%, but without excess demand pressure. Now, we connect these output gaps with inflation. Year 2020, the United States have a negative output gap where the inflation is low. The large negative output gap kept inflation around 1%, but in 2021, the output gap changed to positive, making the inflation rise. Once output rose above potential, inflation increased to around 4.7%, which is consistent with the Phillips curve. In 2020, China had a mild negative output gap where the inflation is low. A small negative output gap kept inflation at 0.98%. In 2021, China had a mild positive output gap which slightly increased inflation. A moderate output recovery raised inflation only to 2.42%, showing stability. And in summary, a large increase in output increases inflation, while a small output swing makes the inflation stable.
US experienced a deep downturn but recovered quickly thanks to its aggressive fiscal and monetary action, but with a higher inflation. On the other hand, China maintained a stable employment and inflation due to smaller demand shocks and steady policies. Overall, these models clearly show how different policy choices shaped labor markets, output, and inflation. Thank you.